Father, they've escaped.
Time to bring them in.
Thank God, we'll be saved by Clark Kent, the Pink Punk, Mega Pornstache Man, the Mighty Falsies, and Elderly Woman. Or rather, welcome one and all to Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue.
Go, Power Rangers!
Space is big and impressive, and full of wonders and terrors and all sorts of things that captivate humanity. It makes us want to go into it, explore it, find new things beyond our little marble. And thus, while it can be cheesy to have stories go to space, there's a reason why Star Trek called it the final frontier. And after experiencing some of the story and location possibilities offered by going into space and doing something new, it can feel like a step backwards to stop going into it. It's the thought process that was probably on the mind of the producers when they were creating Lost Galaxy, hence why we got a space opera revolving around powers that had more to do with animals and nature than with anything space-related. Lightspeed Rescue was also purportedly planned as a space-themed series as well, but for one reason or another, it was decided to make it Earth-based again. And honestly, that was probably for the best. As good as In Space and Lost Galaxy were, trying to shove a square peg into a triangular hole yet again with Sentai footage not involving space would probably have pushed things too far by this point, and potentially make people bored of the concept of being in space yet again. Too much of a good thing can happen, and it'd be easy to get sick of outer space by diving into that well once more. And thus, Lightspeed Rescue plants us right back onto terra firma, and for a while seems to ignore what had happened in the last 2 seasons. On that note, some minor things to bring up in regards to Lost Galaxy that I neglected to mention. Sometimes because I either couldn't find information, or because I didn't find them to be relevant information. For instance, Mike's Morpher into the Magna Defender is actually the morphing device from the Sentai Die Ranger. I generally don't comment on that kind of thing because it has no bearing on Power Rangers. Reusing props is sometimes cool and fun to point out, like the Starship Troopers armor, but I'm not really a Sentai watcher. Most of the audience is here for Power Rangers itself, and it's just a detail that affects nothing in the story. On the subject of Die Ranger, there has been a rumor for decades that there was supposed to be a more involved storyline concerning powers from 3,000 years ago, that there would be ancient Rangers, and that they'd use the Die Ranger suits for the footage of that time since they purchased the right to use the footage. Thing is, according to longtime writer and producer Jackie Marchand in an interview with Den of Geek, no, there were never plans to use the Die Ranger suits. The idea of using the footage certainly kept cropping up since they had purchased it, but it just kept being put on the back burner, eventually getting to a point where the footage was just too old looking to use compared to what they were using at the time. Still, on the subject of shifting gears, something that has been confirmed is that Scorpius was supposed to be the final villain for the show, but in practice, trying to move and operate the large puppet for him proved to be awkward and cumbersome to do, hence why they decided to shift the focus to Trakina as the main villain. And honestly, that ended up really working to their benefit. Maybe that shift, since it altered a lot of the character dynamics and also required more setup and payoff, plus Scorpius' presence 3,000 years ago versus Trakina, affected how much time they'd have to do any ancient Ranger stuff, Die Ranger footage or not. But that's just speculation. And again, the fact that despite the production difficulties, they still managed to put together a damn solid season shows these people were not incapable of reworking stuff on the fly. And with that out of the way, let's dive in and get into this season. The series begins with Operation Lightspeed, where we see 3 men stumbling upon a buried chamber in the desert. They discover a casket and push the lid open, revealing it to be the Ark of the Covenant. No, of course, but in practice, it's not that different, actually. A group of multicolored spirits emerge from the casket and fly off. Less face-melting, though. The Lightspeed theme song is, once again, just okay. It has some addictive elements, but it's once again not anything special.
The signal is calling, our planet is falling.
Again, like Lost Galaxy's theme, it's not bad, just that I never really have any deep desire to revisit it. And one minor frustrating part of it is that in the middle, it sounds like it's ending when the music dies down on Rangers Save the Day, but then it just starts up again. Anyways, Anyway, the spirits emerge in the city of Mariner Bay and start attacking it. We immediately cut to some sort of military facility where the person in charge, Captain Mitchell, is informed of the spirits being freed. He says it's time to bring them in, and we cut to our new team. First up is Joel Rawlings, the Sky Cowboy, a famous stunt pilot. Next is Kelsey Winslow, who's climbing a mountain only to be met by the men in black at the top. Third is Chad Lee, a SeaWorld performer. Finally, there's Carter Grayson, a firefighter in the middle of rescuing a little girl from a burning building. In the building, he spots a monster and then leaps out of it, saving the girl. The fifth member is the one who's actually been recruiting them, a paramedic named Dana Mitchell, the captain's daughter. We then get to meet, rather quickly, our villains. It seems that Mariner Bay was built on top of a demonic temple, which probably violates some zoning regulations, and the demons, led by a creature called Diabolico, must care for a demon infant named Impus until the true leader, Queen Bansheera, can return. The 5 humans are brought to a submarine and subsequently led to an underwater facility called the Lightspeed Aqua base. It's pretty high-tech, especially since the flat-screen panels look rather similar to the ones used on the Astro megaship. One of the rumors about this series' production was that the Zords and technology were developed after being reverse-engineered from old destroyed Zords of the Rangers, but it was discarded because the producers wanted the show to have as little reference to previous seasons as possible, so it would be more accessible to new viewers. This is an attitude that would not last forever, though for the longest time, much of the references to the past would only come via the season requisite team-up. And I can confirm this takes place in the same universe as the previous seasons, so we can probably assume the reverse-engineered Ranger Tech explanation is the correct one, even if it's not set on screen. Hell, at one point I even heard the communicator beep from in space used in the base. Reused sound effects for the production, or in-universe technology and software reuse. You make the call! Anyway, Captain Mitchell explains about the demons, who were locked away by a warlock 5,000 years ago.
Lightspeed has developed technology and highly sophisticated weapons that we believe can stop them.
And somewhere there's a knockoff organization that named itself Lightspeed Rescue. Joel doesn't believe them and wants to leave, but Carter explains about what he saw in the burning building. The group is shown footage of the spirits terrorizing people, and the 4 instantly volunteer. They're given their rescue morphers, which are sadly unimpressive to me. Nothing really wrong with them, it's just their flipping open seems so small. The top just quickly rotates open 90 degrees. Ooh, unleash the power. The group is given spiffy team jackets and a Humvee. See, it's totally recycled tech from other seasons. That's Tankenstein from in space. And are sent off to deal with the demons. The demons as foot soldiers, the Batlings, begin their attack on the people. The 5 try to fight them, with Carter going straight for just trying to run over the fire monster with his car. Carter Grayson, with the power of vehicular homicide. In all honesty, I actually instantly like this guy for this reason. Though he does get tossed around, same as the rest of the Rangers. Captain Mitchell instructs them to morph.
Ready? Lightspeed Rescue!
I might be mistaken, but I think this is the first season to really make the ready thing a common occurrence in the show. If I am mistaken, well, I can at least say now that it's a common thing, right alongside the actual morphing calls. Something very different about this series from what's come before is that the 5 morph in plain sight. None of the secret identity stuff. And really, good. These people are supposed to be an officially sanctioned government team, and as such, their identities should be public for the sake of accountability. There's a difference between a mystical figure empowering 5 teenagers with attitude with the power, or a group of people pulling some swords from a stone as prophesized, versus the government giving 5 adults with attitude power to summon giant robots and laser guns. Anyway, I've got to say I wasn't really fond of the suits at first. I think it's just the pattern on the chest. Once again, too much white and not enough of their individual colors, plus the pattern doesn't extend to the back side of their outfits, so it kind of feels like one of those knockoff hollow action figure toy sets where they only painted the front. Admittedly, the design is better than the all-white torsos of the Galaxy Rangers, and the outfits grew on me. However, I've come to realize why the suits look so familiar. Apparently, Lightspeed is funded by the Umbrella Corporation. Another thing that's kind of off-putting is that these are the first helmets without a sculpted mouth. Which makes sense. These were designed by a military organization for function, not aesthetics. Why would they need that kind of flourish for the outfit after all? The morphing sequence also bugs me. Passing through what looks like goo before they take shape. I wish I could describe what exactly it is that's unappealing about it, but it just doesn't feel right. With their new powers, the Rangers are able to fight off the Batlings and the monster, who bears a striking resemblance to Psycho Red's monster form. Huh, so I guess Astronema just straight up recruited some demons for the Psychos. Makes sense. Something else to note is that the Lightspeed team is also quicker to use their blasters to destroy the monster, even doing a kick-ass gun twirl before holstering them. The five return to the Aqua base, where Captain Mitchell tells them they've got a lot of work ahead of them. Operation Lightspeed is fast, though it of course needs to be. It has to introduce the Rangers, the enemies, and the concept of the show very quickly, and then move on to the next bits. In many ways, it feels reminiscent of Day of the Dumpster, with the mentor figure of Captain Mitchell introducing a group of normal people to a bizarre war with powers and abilities far beyond what they're accustomed to. An enemy that has been released from a long slumber inside of some kind of storage container. And the Rangers need to actually use their Morphers in order to defeat the foot soldiers. On the subject of the villains, however, they have only one scene, and it's basically just exposition. We learn nothing about them as individuals, and there's nothing particularly interesting revealed about them in the first episode. Well, I suppose Vipra stood out from the others, but, only because of one thing.
Just what I thought. In my Vipari, I'm invincible.
Oh no, you're gonna talk like that the entire season, aren't you? Yeah, this is not a great performance. It's not even just the weird lisp she seems to have. Hell, I have a bit of a lisp, so I can sympathize there. It's that she seems incapable of raising her voice. When she's trying to express an emotion, she can barely speak above a normal tone.
I'll lay waste to Mariner Bay, so our Queen Bansheera will rise again.
Being subdued isn't a problem if that's how you're written. As I said, Astronema and Trakina were at their best when they were first introduced and underplayed, but if you're trying to act over the top and instead just sound bored, then you're turning in a bad performance. Her face conveys nothing, and even after she gives off an evil laugh, it just returns to a blank expression. In the following episodes, we meet Jinxer, the finster of the new evil forces, who can create monsters by tossing out Magic the Gathering cards and using an incantation to summon the monster from them. And then there's Loki. Loki exists. Anyway, another difference for this season is that this Ranger team is a military operation, though begging the question of why the other four weren't recruited from their own ranks instead of seeking out civilians. With human-made Power Ranger technology, and the Aqua base has a full staff of people ready to assist them. Thus, new weapons and technology come about because it's not just a robot buddy pushing buttons or one smart person doing all the heavy lifting like in the old days, though we'll mostly interact with the chief scientist. The Rangers themselves don't make much of an impression, save for Carter and Joel. Joel comes off as a douche, at least until he steps up to join them to fight the demons, and Carter is a little bland at first, but clearly heroic and selfless, which makes him a perfect fit for the Red Ranger position. Plus again, tactical thinking by finding the biggest threat on the field and trying to hit him with the biggest weapon they had. In the next episode, we're introduced to the aforementioned chief scientist, Dr. Fairweather, who's in charge of the weapons lab of the Aqua base and the one who invented the rescue morphers. She also invents the team's Zords.
These are your rail rescues. Trains?
Sure, why not? We had cars for a season, so why not trains? Unlike previous teams, whose knowledge of how to pilot the Zords seemed built into their powers, Fairweather explains that the rail rescues are designed to automatically assist the Rangers in their piloting. We also see them being deployed, and boy, it takes a while for those things to get to the surface. I'm sure half the city's been reduced to smoldering rubble by the time they finally get underway. Still, this thing is friggin' awesome, linking up to form one giant flying train. The rail rescues, in turn, deploy individual vehicles for them to pilot that become the Megazord. I admit, I don't mind this as much as I did Turbo's vehicle-based Zords. With them, it seemed just bizarre that a wizard who mostly utilized animals for the basis of the Zord's aesthetics and powers would suddenly switch over to race cars and SUVs for the designs. And yes, I know, limited by the Sentai footage, but again, they weren't under any obligation to use Car Rangers as opposed to one of the Sentai that had come before. They were still close enough to some Sentai seasons that they might have been able to make it work. In this case, it was a government operation that designed their weapons, so it would make sense that they'd design them around vehicles. Of course, there are a number of filler episodes after the premiere, but aside from character development I'll get to at the end, only one really deserves deserves notice. In Cyborg Rangers, Captain Mitchell's superior officer, General McKnight, comes in with a group of androids to replace the Lightspeed team, since they have superior strength and purportedly can't make mistakes. Of course, Dr. Fairweather gives a cliched, "but they haven't got a heart" kind of bullcrap speech, but really their flaw becomes apparent when they fight a monster and a blast causes them to malfunction and turn on their creators. The Rangers, of course, retrieve their powers and destroy the Cyborg Rangers. Unsurprisingly, no one makes any effort to perfect the android tech so that they can at the very least have backup in case they need a rescue or assistance. However, its real significance, with the Rangers gladly willing to join in to help even without their powers, will be more significant in a later video. And really, the heart thing, while a bit childish in its phrasing, is more about how the human factor plays a larger role in the Rangers than just combating Diabolico. The Rangers are frequently seen not just fighting monsters, but actively helping people who are harmed by the monster attacks, be it in aftermath or while the attack is in progress. The cyborgs are controlled from a single large remote controller and are clearly for combat only. And while it's bizarre that normal rescue services are apparently not around a lot of the time, there's a reason it's called Lightspeed Rescue. They're meant to be fast-deploying rescue services who can serve as both a defensive and offensive force. It's why the cyborgs, and by the way, how are they cyborgs if they're entirely robotic and contain no organic components, should still be perfected so that they can at least have an offensive force if the Rangers need to be acting in a rescue capacity at the same time. After some filler episodes, Queen Bansheera's spirit contacts her forces and resurrects a few monsters that severely damaged the rescue Megazord. However, Dr. Fairweather has been working on a new weapon, the Super Train Megazord. The rail rescues are reconfigured so that they form the new Megazord, and the sequence is just badass as the rail rescues fly through the air. Oh, and did I mention this thing is frickin' huge and fires missiles and Gatling cannons and turbine lasers? This is why government and military funding is sometimes important, because the enemy will occasionally only be defeated by one mindset: needs more DACA. The story continues in From Deep in the Shadows. Carter is given a new experimental titanium morpher, but the test is unsuccessful as he's unable to fully morph and is hurt in the process. They decide not to continue testing the morpher and lock it in a safe in Captain Mitchell's office, which seems to be their attitude about any of their tech that doesn't work right away. We also learn that Captain Mitchell had a son named Ryan, who died in a car crash. That night, someone sneaks onto the Aqua base, not an easy feat considering the base is underwater and all, and gets into the safe to steal the titanium morpher, though one wonders how he knew it was in the safe. During an attack, Vipra summons the Titanium Ranger.
Who are you?
I'm your worst nightmare.
The Titanium Ranger is damn strong, easily tossing around the Rangers. His weapon is a gun that transforms into an axe, which, as we've established, melee weapons that become guns are friggin' awesome. They retreat, but aren't able to figure out who could have taken the powers, though Joel speculates that someone inside of Lightspeed must have done it. And look, I know the reason why the base is underwater is because the demons are harmed by water, but shouldn't you guys have security cameras inside the base just in case? In their next confrontation, the Rangers utilize a new weapon, the V-Lancers, which temporarily opens the Titanium Ranger's visor. Captain Mitchell recognizes him, despite the face mask he still has on under it. He orders the group to withdraw. The Titanium Ranger, despite being injured, demanding they continue to fight. Captain Mitchell reveals that the Titanium Ranger is his son. He explains that in the car crash, they went over a cliff, but he managed to hang onto a root. Dana had her arms around his shoulders and neck, but Ryan was holding onto his foot and starting to slip. Diabolico appeared and said he'll save Ryan, but only if his life belongs to him. After Ryan fell, Mitchell screamed for Diabolico to save him, and he promised that he won't see his son again until his 20th birthday. Admittedly, this is weird since Diabolico was supposed to be sealed away in the casket, but it does make for a very good deal with the devil kind of thing. Appropriate for a season with demons. And it's very tragic and all. Diabolico tells Ryan that his father doesn't care about him, that he was gonna let him fall, and that he only loves his daughter. When the Titanium Ranger appears and goes on a rampage, Dana goes off to confront him. It seems like she's getting through to him at first, but when the other Rangers appear, he retreats. Captain Mitchell and Ryan meet up, and it's revealed that he doesn't remember the circumstances behind the fall. Diabolico just telling him a different version of the story. However, when Ryan tackles him off a cliff and they're put in the same situation situation, he suddenly remembers. The tree won't support their combined weight, and Captain Mitchell decides to drop down and save his son. However, Ryan lets go and morphs, saving them. He decides to leave Diabolico and the city, but he takes off the titanium morpher before he goes. He tells his father that he's leaving Mariner Bay so he can find out who he is and whether or not he's truly a good guy in light of all this. The captain hands him a box, telling him to open it when he realizes that he is good. At first he plans to leave on a bus, but when he hears of an emergency caused by Diabolico's latest plan, he runs back, saves a family, and opens the box to reveal his titanium morpher. He morphs and helps save the Rangers from 3 of Diabolico's monsters. Ryan joins up with Lightspeed, but that night he has a dream where Diabolico burns a snake tattoo onto his back.
From now on, every time you morph, the Cobra will move up your body closer and closer.
Once it reaches his neck, it'll strangle him. When he wakes up, the tattoo is still there. Instead of doing, the sensible thing and telling someone about the tattoo, he just proceeds to happily leap into battle alongside the other Rangers despite the risk. All during the fight, the Cobra moves up his body, harming him along the way. Strangely, during this episode, we also see the Super Train Megazord and the Lightspeed Megazord together at the same time. Even though the previous times they summoned the Super Train Megazord, they needed the individual Zords inside of the Super Train. Queen Bansheera, contacting Diabolico, informs him that she's tired of how long it's taken to deal with things, and swears that if he doesn't destroy Mariner Bay, she'll transfer his powers over to her son. Diabolico, refusing to allow an infant to have his power, unleashes his 3 most powerful monsters on the Rangers. The first is destroyed by the previously mentioned team-up of the 2 Megazords. Carter reveals to Ryan that he saw the tattoo moving during the fight, and Ryan explains about it. He doesn't want to tell his father because it's the first chance he's had to do something good and doesn't want his dad to pull him from Ranger duties. However, Captain Mitchell overhears from outside the room. Someone seriously needs to install soundproofing in the Aqua base. And it comes in, telling him that he has to bench him until they can get rid of the tattoo, since he won't lose him again. Fairweather develops a new Zord, the Max Solarzord, but it's designed to be operated by the Titanium Rangers, so they can't use it yet. As the Rangers fight the remaining 2 monsters, and are swiftly smacked around, Ryan steals the Max Solarzord to go help them. The Solarzord actually heads into space and goes towards the sun, charging its solar panels before assuming a humanoid form. He destroys the monsters, but passes out due to the strain of the Cobra. Examination of Ryan reveals that if he morphs one more time, it'll kill him. Strangely, no one takes his morpher away from him so he doesn't do something stupid. Naturally, he ends up doing something stupid. Diabolico unleashes a combined version of his 3 monsters against the Rangers, but luckily Dr. Fairweather now has yet another weapon, Battle Boosters, which are essentially battleizers for the Rangers, though there isn't any advanced armor when they're introduced. Ryan, in the meantime, decides to do something about the Cobra and realizes that it also came from the tomb where Diabolico was imprisoned. He heads there without any backup and takes on a monster version of the Cobra, which when you think about it means that Ryan is literally trying to punch a tattoo to death. I love this show. Diabolico takes on the Rangers himself and just walks through the Super Train Megazord's weapons. He cuts a huge hole in it, forcing the Rangers to abandon it and go into the Lightspeed Megazord. Ryan, in the meantime, defeats the Cobra monster and lifts the curse, heading out to aid the other Rangers. By plugging the Battle Booster into the Lightspeed Megazord, the Solarzord combines with it. The Lightspeed Solarzord absorbs Diabolico's blasts and sends them right back at him.
But be assured that Queen Bansheera will avenge my defeat 1,000-fold.
Yeah, knowing how terrible a boss she is, it's more likely she'll just dock you for not putting in for time off. Diabolico's power transfers into the baby Impus, who becomes encased in a cocoon. Queen Bansheera contacts the Rangers.
Behold my heir, at your destructor.
The Rangers shoot at the cocoon, unleashing Impus's more evolved form.
I am Olympius, son of Queen Bansheera. Bow down before me now.
Carter, being a badass, just keeps charging the guy, even though Olympius smacks him around. But he's forced back after shenanigans in the episode, and afterwards he basically becomes the new Diabolico. A few episodes later, the planets align, and thanks to a mystical ceremony, Queen Bansheera's spirit is able to resume physical form, but only briefly, as Ryan destroys the ceremony site where she was being summoned. She arrives, but only half-formed and encased in stone. With Bansheera's return, Ryan elects to leave and search for a way to trap the demons again. Since Ryan is gone, Fairweather modifies the battle boosters so that they can operate the Max Solarzord without him, as well as unveiling yet another giant robot, the Omega Megazord. One of the most awesomely named Megazords ever. There's just something so satisfying about saying its name. All that mega. It'd be a real shame if in a later season adding adjectives onto a mega name just got really confusing and stupid. A few fillers later, Bansheera decides that Olympius has failed too often and will give Vipera and Loki command of the evil forces. Olympius tricks them, planning to destroy them, but they escape and end up back near the desert tomb. They enter it and conduct a little spell, Ryan watching from nearby.
Arise! And live again!
I'm back! And better than ever!
Amusingly, the previously on Power Rangers bits on the next few episodes use a different, much worse take of Vipera's line.
Arise! And live again!
It's like they were deliberately trying to sabotage her character, since at this point those previously on segments were always showing the last few episodes, and thus people would see this bad performance over and over when she did a better, not great, but better job in the actual episode. Diabolico tries to confront Olympius, but Bansheera stops the fight, saying their petty squabbles are meaningless and they're both gonna work for her. Not really resolving the whole who's in command now thing. Ryan, in the meantime, copies all the glyphs off of the tomb's wall and heads off to try to find someone who can translate them. But enough about the main plot. This is supposed to take place in the main universe, right? So, how are things over on Miranoi? Well, at 29 episodes into the season, we cut to across the universe on the New World, where we see Leo take his Quasar Saber out of the rock and morph. An evil force he was fighting mysteriously teleports away and travels through a wormhole to Earth. Yup, it's time for the season's team-up. On Earth, the evil forces Leo was fighting take people prisoner in an office building to extract their life force for a woman in shadows. The daughter of two of the kidnapped people tries to warn people of what she saw.
Now you know, dear, there's no such thing as monsters.
You live in a city that is constantly under attack by monsters, and the Power Rangers are known public figures without secret identities. Not to mention the fact that Earth was invaded and almost conquered a few years ago by monsters. Lady, I officially declare you dumbest person in Power Rangers ever. Olympius believes that the monsters are doing it for Bansheera, but when he leaves, the woman emerges from the shadows. Trakina, wearing a mask that covers up burnt sections of her face. We'll talk more about that later. Carter comes across the little girl who tells him about the attack as well as a monster disguised as a man.
You don't believe me, do you?
Actually, I do.
Carter Grayson, not an idiot. Leo somehow makes it to Earth and meets up with the other Rangers.
Hey, you're Leo. The Red Ranger!
How the hell does she know that? Even if the colonists were able to get back in touch with Earth, the Rangers' identities weren't publicly known in Lost Galaxy. Carter's trailing of the disguised monster is interrupted by the ghouls, the foot soldiers of the monster helping Trakina. However, Kai and Maya arrive to help him. Back at the Aqua base, Leo explains the final battle he had with Trakina before the two teams go off to face a disturbance. And of course, bring the little girl with them. Professional life-saving individuals, everybody. The monsters knock them around for a bit before just leaving for no reason, and Carter hatches a plan with the little girl, telling her to go in and pull the fire alarm on the building. Why don't the Rangers just pull rank on the building and tell them to evacuate it to get them out? Or rather, why the hell are they sending the little girl in to pull the fire alarm when Carter could just do it himself? Leo and Carter destroy the monster and head in alone, for some reason, but are aided by Kendricks and Damon, who suddenly show up. The rest of the Rangers join in and they morph, using Sentai footage of them turning the dial, as I said last time, not a thing in Lost Galaxy. But the bigger continuity issue there is that Damon has suddenly stopped being black for this shot. Olympius and his forces show up while Trakina starts to transfer the life force energy into her, mutating her back into her insect form. However, Olympius infects her form with a poison that mutates her into a giant insect monster. The two teams summon their Zords and fight Trakina, the Galaxy Rangers even entering the Omega Megazord and enhancing it with the lights of Orion. And soon they have destroyed Trakina yet again. Pretty sure for good this time. The Galaxy Rangers depart on their jet jammers with no explanation ever given how the hell they made it back to Earth. Well, people claim it was that wormhole we saw in the beginning, but where that came from and how the Rangers learned how to access it is another matter altogether. Then again, Miranoi seems to just have a bunch of wormholes and portals hanging around it like we saw last season. I guess they just found one and guessed that it probably led to Earth. Trakina's revenge is a huge disappointment. For me especially, since I had been looking forward to it all season. It's not that it's bad, but it's underwhelming, especially for a two-parter that brings back the big bad from last season and lets us see last season's team again. The Galaxy Rangers are barely in it, and we spend far too much time with Carter and the little girl bonding. And she's fine. She's not a bad actress, and if this were a regular story, I'd have no objection to it as a cute little filler episode. But it's not, and she is not what we are here for, which is why I haven't bothered giving you guys her name. It kind of feels like they took an existing script and then stapled on the team-up stuff as an afterthought. This is also a weird case because Trakina's Revenge was released months ahead of the airing on TV as a special VHS tape from select McDonald's. It's made even weirder because it wasn't even released as Trakina's Revenge, uniting two teams of Power Rangers, but rather as Power Rangers in 3D. I have no idea if it was even in 3D or why it would be called that, since it's not like there's a lot of shots in here that feel like they're catering to a 3D gimmick or anything. Hell, how would that even work with the Sentai footage, which was assuredly not shot in 3D? And there was some behind-the-scenes tumult with it, since apparently Danny Slavin, who played Leo, had a pay dispute, and he walked off the set after they completed first unit filming. So in stuff like ADR and a few pickup shots, he was played by someone else. I have heard that Amy Miller, Trakina's original actress, was apparently pretty pissed off that a little girl was going to get more screen time than her and, like Danny Slavin, was having pay issues and didn't even end up showing up to filming. Hence why another actress played her in the episodes and they just covered her mouth to hide it. It's not a team-up completely without merit, and it's still fun to see the two teams together. Even seeing them all in the cockpit for a Megazord is pretty damn unique. But you just end up wishing you were watching To the 10th Power again instead. Back to the main story, Ryan locates the Sorcerer of the Sands, which turns out to be a bird, to translate the glyphs. He initiates the spell to reseal the demons, but Diabolico counters it, reducing the Sorcerer to dust. In the same episode, Olympius is sent to a shadow dimension and sealed there by Diabolico. But it turns out his mother doesn't care since he's failed so often. Man, Bansheera is not only a terrible boss, but a negligent parent too. Jinxer remains loyal to the prince, however, and instructs him to absorb the other monsters in the realm, mutating him and enhancing his power. After he escapes, a spell on Captain Mitchell causes him to transfer the Aqua base's power into Olympius. They eventually manage to destroy his power source, the Star Power, which he had gotten from Diabolico originally, and he's severely weakened by the incident. We actually get 3 proper battleizers this season in the form of the Mega Battlers. One for Chad, one for Joel, and one for Carter. None for Dana or Kelsey because, you know, they're girls and stuff. Carter's is actually a motorcycle that converts into his armored form. They don't look overly silly like previous ones, possibly because they're mostly just big guns, though I really have to question the skis on Carter's. Seriously, unless they're just armored greaves, adding feet to the battleizer always looks silly. And no, the feet on Lost Galaxies don't act as stabilizers for the big gun, they're just big shoes. Blowback from the weapon would just make his legs bend while his feet stayed in place. In the final few episodes, Queen Bansheera's transformation back to normal starts to take hold. Because of her many failures, Vipra is absorbed by her as the last bit of energy she needs.
Now he emotes.
Loki goes to Bansheera for the chance to destroy the Rangers, but before he does, he gives Diabolico a new power source.
Thank you, Loki. Be careful, old friend.
Wait, why are they only now making these two buddy buds? Bansheera tricks 4 of the Rangers into the dimension where the demon's lair is and forces Diabolico to shoot at them while Lokai is in the path, destroying him. Diabolico swears off his allegiance to Bansheera. And this, kids, is why the best time to unionize is before your boss lets your friend get killed. Bansheera uses Diabolico's energy to attack the Rangers, Carter arriving to come save them. Diabolico tells him where to strike Bansheera and he runs off to attack her. Carter goes right in with his best "I am a man" punch and hits Bansheera. The blast sends the Rangers out of the dimension, but Bansheera follows and grows. The Rangers force her into retreat and Diabolico swears revenge for Lokai. However, Olympius intercepts him and the two battle, Olympius managing to overpower him and bring him to Bansheera, who drains his power and makes him a mindless slave. But only briefly, as the Rangers get him to remember what Bansheera did to him and the others. Olympius takes control of Diabolico again, but not before handing Carter a key that the Sorcerer of the Sands had said would help re-imprison the demons. In the ensuing battle, the Megazords are severely damaged. Carter, just to show how badass he is, charges right at the giant Diabolico and shoots at him.
Come on, you bastards! Take a shot at me right in the nose!
At the last second, Dana and Kelsey come to the rescue in the Life Force Megazord, which takes energy directly from the Rangers. Seems kinda dangerous and silly, but hey, it does the trick, utterly destroying Diabolico and Olympius. The Life Force Megazord is premiering here because we need to sell some toys before the season ends in 2 episodes. Although ironically, America not getting that toy. The key becomes a glyph, and Jinxer reveals to Bansheera that he placed a battling card on the leg of the Megazord, meaning that the Rangers will be bringing batlings into the Aqua base. The season comes to a close in The Fate of Lightspeed. Ryan contacts the team and learns Bansheera's plan to resurrect all of the fallen monsters from the Shadow Realm or whatever. However, Bansheera intercepts the transmission and takes Ryan before he can elaborate. While Carter heads to the other dimension to rescue Ryan, Jinxer activates the battling card, releasing hundreds of them into the Aqua base. The Rangers quickly get to work fighting them off as the workers flee, though we quickly see that the Aqua base's defense personnel are pretty pitiful, just running around with riot shields. To make matters worse, the batlings commandeer the Life Force Megazord and bring it out of the base, having it openly attack the structure. Captain Mitchell goes into shock and Fairweather takes command, ordering the crew of the Aqua base to evacuate. Mitchell remains on the command deck as the place falls apart around him.
Everything I've worked so hard for, it's gone.
So I guess I'm just gonna stop working hard at all and just stand here. They convince him to leave, but the Megazord attacks the connecting tube, cutting off their only way to escape. To make matters worse, the glass in operations starts to crack. Carter, in the meantime, frees Ryan. The two morph and start fighting however they can, though of course it's a matter of them being simply outnumbered. Jinxer and the Batlings take the disabled Omega Megazord to complete the Queen's plan, involving giant stones placed in a specific way. Bansheera expels the two Rangers as water starts seeping into the Aqua base, ending Part 1. Part 2 begins with the Rangers pretty consigned to their fate, but as they view the damage the Omega Megazord is causing on the city,
guys, we got work to do.
They locate a flooded maintenance shaft that leads to the submarine bay, and Chad swims for it to see if he can reach it. Bansheera brings her temple to the city as Chad returns, saying they can reach the sub-bay. They make it out just as the bridge finishes collapsing. They get there, but the Batlings intercept and stop their descent. However, Joel fires the sub's torpedoes, bringing water in around them for their escape. They shoot torpedoes again to knock the Life Force Megazord out of the way. It explodes, taking the Aqua base with it. Carter and Ryan take out the Omega Megazord, but it drops the last stone into place. The rest of the Rangers arrive and morph as the final phases of Bansheera's ceremony begin. The Rangers confront the Queen.
Nothing can stop me now!
Nothing except us!
The team fights as best as they can, but Bansheera completes the ceremony, Carter's helmet getting knocked off. He kicks Bansheera into the crypt where the monsters will come out and gives Ryan the thumbs up, but in a nice twist on what happened in Lost Galaxy, Bansheera grabs Carter and drags him down with her. He tells them to close the lid, but the spirit of Diabolico arrives and breaks Bansheera's hold, allowing the Rangers to rescue Carter. They seal the lid, trapping Bansheera in the Shadow Dimension. The temple collapses, and Mariner Bay, and consequently the world, is saved. With the job complete, the Rangers hand in their morphers, and Joel even gets to have his date with Fairweather that he's been trying to get all season. However, as they spot a fire truck speeding by,
Hey! You forgot these!
Lightspeed Rescue is very much a back-to-basics Ranger series and feels very reminiscent of the very first season. Thematically, it's an overt magic versus technology theme with the Rangers' powers all completely developed by human hands, and we even have the scientists who designed their weapons working with them. Their enemies were demons who were summoned by magic and frequently used magic spells and curses to further their designs. Another thing that felt reminiscent of the first season was the Titanium Ranger, first introduced as a villain, and his story had shades of the original Green Ranger saga. And I don't mean any of this in a bad way. It felt very nostalgic in that sense and quite enjoyable. Speaking of the Titanium Ranger, he's the first Power Ranger ever to be a completely American invention. The Sentai that Lightspeed was based on didn't have a 6th Ranger, nor did it have a character like the Phantom Ranger that they could fill the 6th Ranger slot with, so they made up the Titanium Ranger stuff. The first American exclusive Ranger without any Sentai source footage whatsoever. It's a pretty good job too. Sure, it meant they couldn't do as much with him because it required less Sentai footage, but he looked awesome and showed that American-created Rangers can work. The season is mixed for me. There's a lot to like here. The Aqua base and its staff were a very different sort of command center, and the new weapons being churned out on a regular basis felt very natural for a military operation to be doing. The rescue material wasn't quite as exciting as fighting monsters, but it really highlighted their status as superheroes. The Zords were made of solid metal awesome, and the characters themselves really grew on me. I'd say the season's biggest flaw, and what drags it down, is its villains. I'm sorry, but the demons only got interesting at the very end when Diabolico turned on Bansheera and exhibited camaraderie with Loki, something that was never apparent in the 30-plus episodes before it. Vipera was terrible and always looked silly driving around in her car, and the other demons just didn't have any depth to them. Admittedly, the same could be said of Rita in the first season, but at least she scored some victories over the Ranger, and the show was just starting out. They weren't trying to do anything more complex than, this is good guys, this is bad guys. But we've had 2 more seasons now with more complex and interesting villains and motivations, with the villains also managing to be formidable on several occasions. The demons never scored any major victories over the team this season. Their best plot revolved around Ryan, and when he left, a good chunk of interesting things left with him. We also had noble evildoers like Ecliptor and Villamax in recent seasons. Sure, Scorpius was boring as hell, but his death gave Trakina renewed life as the main villain of Lost Galaxy. By this point, one should expect something a little more than the demons just at the end remembering to be interesting. The Batlings are really one of the most unimaginative foot soldiers ever. Admittedly, we are back to Sentai foot soldiers instead of original ones for the show that we've had for the last few seasons, but they're so bland. It's guys in black suits with tiny little fake wings and some goggles. At least the putties, while coming from Sentai footage, had the wrinkly, deformed faces to make them look alien and different. Watching the Batlings, I never got the impression they were demons. They just looked like guys in spandex. The point is that Lightspeed's main problem was its enemy, which is a shame because there was certainly potential with them. The Rangers themselves, though, I actually rather liked. Carter is a badass through and through. He's driven by his desire to live up to a firefighter who saved his life as a child, who turns out to have been Captain Mitchell. It's kind of interesting with the redo of this video. Back when I first did it, a common complaint was that Carter was an incredibly bland character, but I brought up in the original video just how frickin' awesome he is, and the attitude seems to have shifted, with most people agreeing with me. Whether that's actually because of people reevaluating because of me, or just fandom shifting in general, I couldn't say. But yeah, the dude's kind of amazing in how fearless he was. He tries to run over a monster. He pulls his gun to stop the enemy. He goes running at a giant monster with just his handguns. He didn't really undergo any development, but he didn't need to. He was just awesome. We can have characters who don't have major arcs as long as you give us something to keep us interested. And with Carter, the man just continually proved how he was a force to be reckoned with. Dana was doing just fine character-wise until a bizarre episode near the end called In the Limelight, wherein a fashion mogul out of the blue hires her to be their new model. All of a sudden, she's a big-time celebrity and becomes self-absorbed and completely disregards her ranger duties, despite never in the past indicating that she had those tendencies. It'd be one thing if she was under a spell or something, or if we learned that she never got the chance to have any kind of frivolous, glamorous lifestyle since her father was career military and imparted that on to her, but this is just her suddenly, for no reason at all, abandoning her post as defender of the friggin' city. She walks off during a training exercise, much to the amazement of her fellow Rangers.
And you gonna let her leave just like that?
I have to trust her to make her own decisions.
Yeah, I appreciate that kind of sentiment from a father and all, but you are a military operation, and you are her commanding officer. Lives are at stake. If she isn't up to snuff, take away her Morpher and give it to someone who actually gives a damn. Yeah, in the story, she eventually realizes that being a ranger is more important and all, but the sudden shift in attitude is just so weird. It'd make more sense maybe if it had happened earlier in the season. Like Carter, there isn't a lot of change in her character, and she's probably the blandest of the group. Chad had the most martial arts background, but it's odd. He was established in the first episode as the SeaWorld guy, and he didn't utilize those skills until near the end of the season. Instead, it's the martial arts background that was the most emphasized. He's not given much of a personality, but we saw him frequently be friendly with Kelsey, which again felt very reminiscent of the close friendship Billy and Trini had back in season 1. Plus, he had a love interest in 2 filler episodes. A mermaid! Not much to say there, but hey, drama is good. Joel had the most personality, and it did improve over time. Namely, from being a self-centered, horny jackass to being someone responsible and noble. In Rising from the Ashes, he expresses genuine concern about Mrs. Fairweather's constant workload. His jerky behavior diminished over time, a subtle expression of it being that in the last few episodes, he pretty much stopped wearing his cowboy hat. Sure, through most of the season, he was determined to bed Dr. Fairweather, but he had a good heart, and in the last episode, when he does score the date with her, he chooses to go with the other Rangers to help people instead. Ryan assisted the Rangers with exposition, having spent most of his life with the forces of evil, and therefore knew some of their plans ahead of time, as well as helping out and trying to stop the demons in a different way. Let's face it, Ryan was the only one among the group who was being proactive. The others were essentially always going to be a rescue squad, responding to danger as it happened, but didn't take any steps to finally put an end to Bansheera's forces. Ryan was the one who went out and said, the demons aren't going anywhere, so I'm going to figure out how to put them away for good. Which is definitely a plus, despite not really having much personality after his initial episodes. At first, I wasn't sure why exactly Kelsey would be chosen to become a ranger. She's not exactly a martial arts expert, she's not a public servant, she doesn't have any military training. However, seeing her in The Fifth Crystal showed her evading and fighting off monsters while on rollerblades. She's extraordinarily agile and quick on her feet. Her experiences in sports and fitness actually are well suited for a profession where she has to adapt to quickly changing situations and getting people out of harm's way in a hurry. The downside is that she's impulsive and doesn't look before she leaps. She ends up with the next most development. While she remains very outgoing and energetic throughout the series, an episode where she's almost killed because she failed to take her time made her a little less rash. I did not have a good first impression of Captain Mitchell in the initial few episodes. Instead of explaining anything, he just wagged his finger and assumed that the Rangers are going to learn something when they make a mistake. He never says why they should follow his orders, even though it would take 2 seconds at most to explain them. Carter wants to save some people, but Mitchell orders him to put out a fire. Instead of saying, "Put out the fire, it's heading towards flammable gases," he just keeps repeating the order, even while Carter is hesitating. And the hesitation and confusion takes more time than it would take to say that. When a dangerous fuel cell is being transported by the Rangers, he sends Dana to give an old friend of his a ride. He never tells her, "Oh, by the way, the fuel cell that the Rangers are carrying is a diversion. My friend is carrying the real one." He just lets her yell at him for being condescending because she's his daughter, and she almost puts the fuel cell at risk by attempting to come to the aid of the Rangers instead of protecting him. However, those 2 incidents aside, Mitchell did a lot better in future episodes, stepping in when he needed to, but then stepping back when the situation demanded it. I will say that his acting could have been better during the fate of Lightspeed. We see him shocked and standing at attention as the base collapses around him, but we don't really see that reflected in his face or his body language. He just stands still. When Captain Stanton stood and looked at the destruction wrought upon his command, his sorrow and regret were evident, and he moved on regardless. When Mitchell's command falls apart, he blue screens and stares at an exploding console. The synth music is definitely improved this season and has shades of the series theme song in it, which is a big help in making it more enjoyable. The lack lack of a rockin' soundtrack didn't feel as detrimental during this season as it had in Lost Galaxy. An interesting thing to note is that unlike previous seasons, the Rangers are much quicker to pull their blasters, which makes sense. During the Zordon era, we had martial artists through the first 6 seasons. In Lost Galaxy, the Rangers utilized their Quasar Sabers for the majority of their combat, but that made sense for them considering they're the source of their powers. In this season, we're not dealing with martial artists. We're dealing with people who were specifically brought in to be combat soldiers. They don't waste time by kicking and punching. They're gonna shoot the damn thing to stop it as quickly as they can, or try to run it over. Lightspeed Rescue was both different and familiar in a lot of ways. The stakes didn't seem as high as they had in previous seasons despite the world-ending threat, but there's a very nice sense of optimism about it, that if you were living in Mariner Bay, you could rest easy knowing that the Power Rangers were watching over you. However, the lack of interesting villains was a detriment to an otherwise decent series. Lightspeed is not bad, but there are much better seasons. Like Next Time, where we witness the timeless wonder that is Time Force.
But I'm sure you're well aware that at that close distance, you'll blow up yourself, too!
Come on, Red. Pull the trigger.